Well, this series has been a lot of fun. Summer Blockbuster. How many movie fans we have out there? How many of you movie fans love going to the movies? The rest of you live a sad, pitiful life, I guess. Well, I love movies. Chris and I, the two of us that have been doing this series, we absolutely love movies, love going to the movies. We've never gone together, though. We need to remedy that. But love watching movies. I'm one of those people that actually has a movie collection. I don't know if you're into that. I know today a lot of people are using Netflix and illegally downloading and streaming. We won't get into that. But a lot of people are into other methods of watching movies these days and owning movies. But I'm from the era I loved like going to Walmart and other places and buying Best Buy, buying DVDs, buying Blu-rays, and just having boxes and boxes and boxes of them, and I still have them, and Lisa loves that about our house and our storage room. I've just got just about every movie that you can probably think of, and people sometimes go, man, why do you spend so much money on movies? It's because I love them. I love watching them. I love rewatching movies. Anybody like that? You could watch the same movie over and over and over again, especially if you have your favorites, and if you're anything like me, you have lists of movies you love, whether it's, your top 10 comedies, your top 10 action movies, your top 10 dramas. I have an ultimate top 10, the top 10 movies that if I was stranded on an island, I would love to have these 10 movies, and I could watch them over and over and over again throughout the course of my life. And I take frequent stock of my list. I sometimes go through it and just make sure that every movie that's in my top 10 is still in my top 10, because every now and then a new movie comes out that I just absolutely love, or maybe it's an older movie that I've never seen and I watch it and I'm like, man, I just love that movie. And some of you have absolutely no idea what I'm talking about, and you have way better things to do with your time. But that's just me. I just love movies. When I was thinking about movies, I was thinking about the Count of Monte Cristo. It's one of my absolute favorite movies. We just watched a little bit of a clip from that movie. Many of you have not seen that movie, but it's an absolute classic. It came out around, I think, 2002, and I've watched that movie over and over and over again. It's always been one of my favorites since the time that I watch it. It's a movie that's based on a book, a famous book written by a man named Alexander Dumas, the same writer who gave us The Three Musketeers. And he wrote this story, and this movie at least, didn't have a blockbuster budget, but it's a blockbuster story. It's the story of two friends who had been lifelong childhood friends, had done life together forever. One of them was rich, and one of them was poor. Now, Fernand Mondego, who you saw in that clip, Fernand comes from a wealthy family. He's got everything. He's got money, he's got power, he's got status. Everything that you could possibly want to imagine, Fernand Mondego had it. And then there's Edmond Dantes, who is just the son of a clerk. He's poor. He doesn't have a lot. He's a hard worker. Fernand has everything except the girl. He doesn't have Mercedes. Mercedes is the girlfriend of Edmond Dantes, and they've been lifelong, boyfriend and girlfriend. And Fernand has always been jealous of the relationship that for some reason Edmond has with this girl. He can't understand that, and has always tried to kind of sow a seed of discord in their relationship so that he can eventually date her. And nothing seems to work. Mercedes is just in love with Edmond, and so he can't take it anymore. Fernand just can't. His jealousy just wells up, and he gets to the point where he devises a plan. He begins to sow, a seed of lies, and he, basically creates this web of deceit, and he has Edmond falsely accused and falsely imprisoned for the rest of his life. And because Edmond is out of the picture, then Fernand comes in and takes what he believes is rightfully his, this girl Mercedes, and he takes the relationship that Edmond once cherished and valued, and he takes it and robs Edmond of it and takes Mercedes for his own. Now, throughout their lives, because they were childhood friends, anytime either one of them would have a personal victory or a moment that was worth celebrating, one friend would give the other friend the king from a chess set. And he would say, "Kings to you," because in that moment, they were king of the moment. And in the clip that we just watched, when Edmond realizes that Fernand has betrayed him, before he's taken away, Fernand gives him the chess piece, the king, one last time, and he says, "To remember better days." Now, if you haven't seen the movie, I'm not going to say anything more other than do yourself a favor and go watch this movie. Even if you have to stream it, if you want to borrow the Blu-ray, I have it. It's just an amazing movie. Grab yourself some popcorn and watch this movie. You'll love it. It's got everything in it. It's got a love story. It's got action. It has betrayal and revenge. There's some humor in it. There's suspense. This movie's perfect. It's got absolutely everything. And every time I watch this movie, I've watched it over and over and over again. In fact, we watched it at my house last night. Every time I watch this movie, I think the same thing. Even though he had everything and anything that anybody in that movie could have wanted, all Fernand Mondego could see was the one thing that he didn't have. And the jealousy just overwhelmed him to the point where he lost sight of everything. He lost sight of what true love is. He lost sight of what friendship means. He lost himself in the end. And it'd be one thing if that only happened in the movies. It would be only one thing if it just happened in made-up stories and books that we read. But the truth is, if we're not careful, the same thing could happen to you. And the same thing could happen to me. Because here's what happens, and here's what we saw in this movie. I'm going to show it up on the screen. What we see and how we see shapes and impacts what and how we think. And what and how we think shapes and impacts what we feel. And you and I make decisions based on what we feel. So it's critical that we pay attention to the things that are going on inside us and going on around us. We need to take stock and evaluation of what's happening, the way that we see things, the way that we see the world, the way that we see situations, and the way we see circumstances. Because if we're not careful, if you're not careful, if I'm not careful, because of the way we see things, we could make decisions that we'll regret for sometimes the rest of our lives. Now, I don't want to over-dramatize it. There are some times that it doesn't really matter. It's not that big a deal. Sometimes it just comes down to a first date that very quickly ends up being the last date. And sometimes it ends up in resulting in us buying a pair of pants that we have no business buying, and more importantly, have no business wearing. But sometimes, the truth is, sometimes it turns into so much more than that. Sometimes it turns into, that first date turns into being a marriage that we shouldn't have got into. And sometimes that purchase ends up becoming a series of purchases that lead to a debt that we can't get out of. And so it's critical that we pay attention to how we see things because it impacts everything. And here's what it all boils down to. Here's the whole point, and I'm just going to kind of give it to you up front, and then we're going to spend the rest of our time together this morning talking about it. It's simply this. We don't see things as they are. We see things as we are. We don't see things as they are. We see things as we are. That opportunity isn't positive or negative. It's you that's positive or negative. That opportunity is what it is, but who you are impacts the way you see that opportunity and in turn, what you make of it. It is what it is. It's the way that you are that impacts the way that you see it, which in turn impacts what that opportunity eventually becomes. So how we see things is critical. And it's vital that we pay attention to it, or else we'll end up making decisions that have implications that in the moment we can't see. It's so incredibly important. It's important that we take stock of things and we evaluate things and we see things for what they are. And it's difficult to do that because the only way to do that is to have an evaluation, is to be able to look inside of yourself and evaluate and determine, who am I? It's hard to look in the mirror and see certain things. It's easy to see in other people, right? It's easy to look from the outside in into the lives of other people and see anger and resentment and bitterness and greed and jealousy and negativity. It's easy to see those things from the outside in when you're looking at other people's lives, but it's almost impossible to see those same things in the mirror. And the reason that it's so difficult to see those things in the mirror is because, and let's be honest, we're all really good at this, we can justify our actions and we can justify our attitudes because of how we see things and what we think about what we see and how we feel based on what we see. And we can justify just about anything that we do. And for those of us that are Christians, for those of us that would call ourselves followers of Jesus, this is so incredibly important. Because we're called to see the world, we're called to see everything and everyone in it, not through the lens of who we are, but through the lens of who God is. It's through the lens of who God is. And the only way to do that, you can't govern that by a list of do's and don'ts and rights and wrongs. The only way that you can do that is when you get to the place where you have a heart and a mind that's transformed by our Heavenly Father. And it results in us looking at circumstances and situations through the lens of the fact that God is sovereign, that God is Lord, and that He has lordship over all that is and all that happens. And so, with the time that we have left together this morning, what I want us to do is I want to look into the pages of history, specifically the lives of two men whom God placed in the same position, two men who God put in the same position and were given an opportunity to see the same thing the same way, but two men who didn't. Two men who had an incredible opportunity before them, but only one was successful. Two men who could have experienced the same outcome in their lives, but didn't. And the reason they didn't is because only one of the two men saw things the way that God sees them. And the way that he was able, and the reason that he was able to see things the way God sees them is because of the person that he was. And what we're going to see through their lives, what we're going to discover in their journeys, in their story, is that power, potential, opportunity, none of those things matter. What matters is that we pay attention to how we see things, how we see situations, how we see circumstances, how we see opportunities. We have to pay critical attention to how we see, because that reflects who we are. And we see from who we are, which impacts and shapes what we think, what we feel, and we make decisions based on those things. So in the end, it's not about what you can justify. Because believe me, I've done this, and I know many of you have done this. You can justify just about, if not everything that you do and everything that you think and everything that you feel based on what you see. It's not about what you can justify. It's about the state and the place of your heart. Because again, we see everything through who we are. We're going to start in the book of 1 Samuel chapter 13, and we're going to fast forward all the way up to chapter 24. We're going to be jumping around a lot. But before we jump in, I want to give you some context for the content that we're going to look at this morning, okay? Saul is the king of Israel. He became the king of Israel when he was 30 years old, and he reigned for 42 years. He was in charge of the economy. He was in charge of the fighting. He was in charge of the entire kingdom of Israel. Saul was and had everything except for one thing. Better yet, one person. See, Saul was under the authority of God's spokesperson, a man named Samuel. And any time before Saul could lead the troops into battle, he had to wait for God's man, Samuel, to show up on the scene and make a sacrifice and basically okay everything that was happening. So where we're about to pick up, one day Saul and his men are at a place called Michmash. The Philistine army is pressing in around them, and Saul's men, Saul's people, are freaking out. I mean, they're on the verge of not just losing the battle, they're on the verge of losing their lives. And as you can imagine, they're terrified. They're freaking out. And Saul has been waiting for Samuel, get this, for 7 days. It's like, you got one job to do, man, and we're waiting for you for 7 days. And they're waiting because Samuel told Saul to wait for him to get there. And that's where we're going to pick up, and we're going to show these verses up on the big screen together. Here we go. Saul realized that his troops were rapidly slipping away. He realized they're rapidly slipping away. And this is an observation that he's made. He sees what's happening around him, and he begins to think about what he's seeing, and he's come to a realization based on not just what he sees, but what he thinks about what he sees and what he feels and what he can see the people around him are feeling. And again, you have to remember, these men are on the verge of losing not just a battle, they're on the verge of losing their very lives. And Saul sees this happening, and we go on. So he demanded, he came to a conclusion, he came to a place of action. Bring me the burnt offering and the peace offerings, and Saul sacrificed the burnt offering himself. Now, this wasn't Saul being outright defiant. This is something he felt that he was doing as a leader. He felt that what he was doing was right. He felt that what he was doing as a leader was necessary. He needed to do this in the moment. But what he couldn't see in this moment, even though he saw what he needed to do and he felt what he needed to do, even though he could see those things, what he couldn't see is that even though he was doing what was right, he was doing it the wrong way. He was doing the right thing the wrong way. And doing the right thing the wrong way doesn't make it right. Right? Doing the right thing the wrong way doesn't make it right. It makes it justifiable. You can rationalize it and you can reason with it and you can give reasons and validate why you've done what you've done, but doing the right thing the wrong way doesn't make it right. Here's Saul in this moment. And his men are terrified, and he can't see that his actions, while justifiable to him, were wrong. And have you ever done something, and maybe some of you can relate to me because this has happened to me numerous of times, and I'm sure if we're truly honest, it's happened to a number of us. Have you ever done something, and the moment you do it, it blows up in your face? You ever had? Nobody? Okay, good. Just me. That's all right. Well, that's exactly what happens to Saul. Let's put up the next verse. Here it goes. Just as Saul was finishing with the burnt offering, Samuel arrived. He didn't show up days later, didn't even show up hours later. The second that he was done, when finished with the burnt offering, Samuel arrived. Saul went out to meet him and welcome him, but Samuel said, "What is this thing that you've done?" And you got to imagine, Saul's probably taken back. He's the king. He doesn't make mistakes. And Saul in this moment is thinking, look, I've done a good thing. He's probably thinking to himself, when Samuel shows up, he's going to come in here all sheepish and apologetic and apologize to me as the king for making me wait for 7 days for him to show up and do the one thing that's in his job description. Like, he's only got one thing to do, and you've made me wait for 7 days. And he may even come in and say, hey, look, I'm sorry I'm late, but at least you did the right thing. At least you did the right thing. At least you honored the Lord via this sacrifice. But that's not at all what happens. And Samuel doesn't ride in sheepishly at all, and he's not apologetic at all. In fact, he's in Saul's face, and it takes Saul back, and he's thinking, what in the world? And everything that he's done is now being questioned, and here's what Samuel says. Let's continue on. So Saul replied, I saw my men scattering from me, and you didn't arrive when you said you would, and the Philistines are at Michmash ready for battle. Keep going. So I said, the Philistines are ready to march against us at Gilgal, and I haven't even asked for the Lord's help, right? So he's basically saying, I saw what was happening, and I began to think about it, and I realized some things. I came to some conclusions the more I thought about it based on what I've seen, and so I felt compelled to offer the burnt offering myself before you came. It's like, look, I did the right thing. And Saul in this moment is completely taken back. He's not expecting this at all. In his mind, he has the same rationale, the same reasons, the same justification, let's be honest, the same excuses for his actions that, let's be honest, you and I use for ours, right? I saw it. I see it the way I see it. I saw it the way I saw it. I thought this, and I thought that, and I feel, and I felt, and he made a decision based on what he saw, based on what he thought, based on what he felt, and even though he may have done what was right, he couldn't see that he did it the wrong way, and at the end of the day, doing the right thing the wrong way is the wrong thing. But if we were to hop in the DeLorean, if we were to go back in time, if we could stand on that battlefield and talk to Saul, my guess is that Saul would say, look, I was in the right. I mean, if you saw what I saw, if you thought what I thought, if you felt what I felt, you would have probably done the same thing. In fact, I think that Saul would think that what he did was wise, which is why I'm guessing he was shocked, he was floored when Samuel exclaimed the exact opposite. Look what he says. How foolish, he exclaimed. You have not kept the command that the Lord your God gave you. And my guess is Saul's going, yes, I did. I made the sacrifice, but he says, had you kept it, the Lord would have established your kingdom over Israel forever. Keep going. But now your kingdom must end. And love this, for the Lord has sought out a man after his own heart. He sought after a man after his own heart. The Lord has already appointed him to be the leader of his people because you have not kept the Lord's command. And it's as if in this moment Samuel is looking at Saul and he's saying, man, you've missed it completely. Like you couldn't be more blind to what's really going on here. Yes, you see it a certain way, and yes, you think a certain way, and I'm sure that you feel a certain way, and you feel justified in your actions, but Saul, come on, man, you're missing it. The point of the sacrifice wasn't the sacrifice. The point of the sacrifice was to help you see, was to keep you focused on the fact that it is God who has called you, God who has placed you, and you acknowledge his presence and you acknowledge his lordship when you submit to the parameters, to the boundaries that God has established. This isn't about me and you. This isn't about you and my authority and you stepping out from my authority. This is ultimately between you and God, not you and me. And you can't seem to see it that way. This is about you, and God established these boundaries and parameters for you as a leader, Saul, not so you could be tethered to me, but so you'd be tethered to him. And every moment of every day as a leader, more importantly as a man, you would be reminded to see everything that you see as God sees it. That's why he established these things and these parameters in your life. And because you can't see it, won't see it, or don't see it that way, God has moved on. And God has chosen another. And that's exactly what happens. If you fast forward through the scriptures, you're going to find that God taps on the shoulder of a Hebrew hick, David. David is going to be the next king, and God lays it out for him and tells him that he's going to be the next king, and his career takes off like a rocket. He kills the giant Goliath. Many of you know the story of how David fought and killed the giant Goliath. He killed a lion and he killed a bear. The scriptures tell us that it got to the point when David would walk into town, it was like Gaston in Beauty and the Beast. The girls would start singing, right? It's like the girls would be like, Saul has killed his thousands, but David his tens of thousands. I don't know how the song went, and I don't really know if that's the dance that they did, but it's in there. And the scriptures also tell us, get this, the scriptures tell us that Saul saw David with eyes of envy. And again, those eyes of envy speak to who he is. He sees from where he is. And because of what and how he saw the situation, because of how he saw David, it affected what he thought, and it affected what he felt, and eventually he got to the point where he's just eaten alive with jealousy. He's just eaten up with jealousy. And Samuel's words to him earlier about him being replaced, those words have echoed in his heart and in his mind, and now they have a face. Now Samuel's words have a face. It's David's face. And Saul in this moment sees the situation from who he was, not how it was. And he's eaten alive with this jealousy, and he calls on 3,000 Navy SEALs, 3,000 of his best troops, and he gives them one mandate: to track down David and to take him out. So his men begin tracking David, and David hears and gets wind of this, and so David gets some of his best men to go with him, and they flee. I mean, they're on the run. They're on the run for their very lives. And Saul and his men are tracking David, and the soundtrack in the movie gets bigger and louder and more intense, and they come to this place, David and his men, where they're running for their lives, and they come to this place where there's all these caves, and they're trying, they can hear, the horses and the just the noise coming from all these 3,000 men who are on the verge of catching up to them, and they see this cave, and they're like, let's go in here and hide. And that's where we pick up the story. Let's keep going. And at the place where the road passes some sheepfolds, Saul went into a cave to relieve himself. It's in the Bible. And I'm probably thinking like those 3,000 guys, couldn't you have gone before we left? But anyway, but as it happened, David and his men were hiding farther back in that very cave. I mean, you can't script this. Right? I mean, just the irony of the entire situation. David's on the run for his life, and he goes into this cave with his guys, and they're hiding out, waiting for 3,000 men to pass by. But old Saul's got to go number one, and he comes into the very cave that David and his men are in. And David and his men, their eyes have adjusted in the darkness, right? And they can see Saul. They see him, and here's what happens. Now's your opportunity, David's men whispered to him. Today, the Lord is telling you that I will certainly put your enemy into your power to do with as you wish. And in this moment, David is in the very same place that Saul was in 11 chapters earlier. He sees and he thinks, and this feels right. I mean, this just feels too good to be true. I mean, this feels like the perfect opportunity. Now is the time for me to take what God has told me is mine. And David's men are thinking the same thing. They see it the same way, and they're like, man, this is unbelievable. Like, we would have never imagined that we'd be in this situation. Yeah, God told you that you're going to be king, and now here you are in this cave, and the guy's got his pants down. I mean, this is unbelievable. Like, David, this is, and you've heard people say this is a God thing. God is in this. God is all over this. God has this is his will for your life. This is your opportunity, and you're a warrior, David, so go take him out. And David in this moment is in the place that many of us, if not all of us, have found ourselves in from time to time, where it seems perfect, where it feels right, where it seems too good to be true, where it seems like God has set the table for what's yours for the taking. And you'd be a fool to pass up on the opportunity. But again, are you seeing things the way you see them? Or are you seeing this situation, are you seeing this moment, are you seeing this opportunity as God sees it? Because the truth is, and if I'm honest, I've done this in my life, and I'm sure that many of you have done the same thing, it's easy to put it on God. It's easy to put it on God and use God as the scapegoat, and God will do this, and God has done that, and God has opened this, blah, 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 and we just, We just pass things off, and you can do that really quickly, and you can justify just about anything and just flippantly put it on God. God told me. I just feel the Lord is sensing, like we say those things. But do we really see it the way that God sees it? And David is on the edge of making a mistake based on what he sees and thinks and feels in this moment and what other people are telling him based on what they see and what they think and what they feel. And he's this close to making a decision that he will regret for the rest of his life, even though he can't see it in the moment. And here's what happens. So David crept forward and cut off a piece of the hem of Saul's robe. But then David's conscience began bothering him because he had cut off Saul's robe. Keep going. He said to his men, "The Lord forbid that I should do this to my lord the king. I shouldn't attack the Lord's anointed one, for the Lord himself has chosen him." And it's in this moment that David begins, even though his eyes have adjusted to the darkness, in this moment he can see through the fog of this situation. And he has unbelievable clarity in this moment. He could justify taking Saul out. He could even put it on God and say that it was God that had given him this opportunity. But he stops long enough to see this moment for what it is. And it has nothing to do with him and Saul. It has everything to do with him and his heavenly Father. Is he going to see this moment? Is he going to see this situation, this opportunity as God sees it, or how he naturally and how the people around him naturally see it? This isn't about him becoming king. This is about whether or not he is going to submit to the king regardless of that king. This is whether or not he would be king of the moment. Would he be king of this moment? Would he be worthy to one day be king as God had told him he would be? This moment, this very moment would determine it. And the story goes on. So, because David stopped long enough to check his sight. So David restrained his men and did not let them kill Saul. In this moment, he was able to see things the way that God sees them. He stopped long enough to evaluate what he was seeing, thinking, and feeling in that moment. And he stopped long enough and made a decision to do the right thing. And remember, this is so important. We're talking about David's life. This isn't about what house to buy, what car to buy, what job to take. This is his life in this moment is up for grabs. And he stops long enough and he says, look, this is the way that God sees it, and I'm going to do things based on what God sees, and I'm going to see it the way that he sees it. And remember, Saul is an unworthy king. He's an unworthy authority figure. He's totally wheels off, and he is not worthy to be respected in this moment and seen as a king. But David doesn't see it how everybody else would. He sees it as God would, and he restrains his men. And my guess is he heard some things in that moment that many of us hear when we do things the way that God sees them. In that moment, those men were probably thinking to themselves, man, David, you're going soft. You're caving in the cave, David. You're weak. You're not a leader. You're in this moment, and you should take what's yours for the taking. And that's exactly why David was chosen to be king and not any of them. Because he was the only one that saw things the way that God saw them. And the story goes on. After Saul had left the cave and gone his way, David came out and shouted after him, "My lord the king!" And when Saul looked around, David bowed low before him. And can you just sense the body language of David in this moment? I mean, better yet, can you even understand it? I mean, it's absolutely crazy, right? To think, here's David in this moment. I mean, it's one thing to let him go in the shadows. It's one thing to let Saul walk and no one would have known except for David's men. No one would have known. Saul would never have known. But to come out in the open, to come out in broad daylight and submit and bow down in this moment and put your neck, your life, everything that you are on the line in this moment in front of Saul is just unbelievable. But in this moment, David is winning a battle that only he and God know that he's fighting. And the story goes on. Then he shouted to Saul, "Why do you listen to the people who say I'm trying to harm you? This very day you can see with your own eyes that it isn't true. Keep going. Look, my father, at what I have in my hand. It is a piece of the hem of your robe. I cut it off, but I didn't kill you. Keep going. This proves that I'm not trying to harm you and that I have not sinned against you, even though you've been hunting to kill me. And then he says something powerful. Watch this. May the Lord judge between us. May the Lord judge between us. Perhaps the Lord, maybe he will, maybe he won't. Perhaps the Lord will punish you for what you are trying to do to me, but I will never harm you. And David in this moment, David is unbelievable in this moment, says, I see what's really going on here. I see this situation as it is, and this has nothing to do with me and you, Saul. This is about me. This is about me and my ability to see God's lordship, his kingship, who he is, and that he controls everything and is in everything. And this moment is about my ability to see him in this situation and see as he would see this situation and to respond as he would and would want me to in this situation. This has nothing to do about me taking. This has nothing to do with me getting what's owed to me in this moment. This has everything to do, I believe David would have said in this moment. This has everything to do with who I am and who in this moment I'm becoming. And he goes on, as the old saying goes, from evil people come evil deeds, so you can be sure that I will never harm you. Keep going. And who is the king of Israel trying to catch anyway? Should he spend his time chasing one who is as worthless as a dead dog or a single flea? And this isn't David, operating with some sort of false sense of humility here. This is David being David. This is who David is. This is what a man after God's own heart looks like. He says, Saul, listen, man, your biggest problem isn't with me. Your biggest problem is with God. And you can't see that in this situation. You, for some reason, are blinded to this situation. You should be more concerned with God. And when you stop long enough to see God in this situation, you realize that compared to him, I'm nothing. I'm absolutely nothing. But you can't see that in this moment. So he goes on, may the Lord therefore judge which of us is right and punish the guilty one. And I love this. He is my advocate, and he will rescue me from your power. And then he just kind of drops the microphone and stands there. And I love it. And then comes the point in this story where it goes from being like a Gladiator, Braveheart type of movie to kind of something out of Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Watch what happens next. This is hilarious. When David finished speaking, Saul called back, is that really you? It's kind of like, man, you let me go on that whole monologue this whole time and you just didn't stop and kind of confirm that it's really, like, it's just kind of weird. It's too, anyways. Then he began to cry and he said to David, you are a better man than I am. You're a better man than I am, for you have repaid me good for evil. Keep going. Yes, you have been amazingly kind to me today, for when the Lord put me in a place where you could have killed me, you didn't do it. You didn't do it. And then he says, more importantly, he asks David a question. And this question is so incredibly powerful and it's profound. Listen to the question he says. Who else would let his enemy get away when he had him in his power? Who else would do that? And my guess is every one of those Navy SEALs, all 3,000 of Saul's soldiers are probably thinking, not me. My guess is that every one of David's men who were on the edge of the cave kind of watching this thing unfold are thinking, not me. And every one of them would have been absolutely right. Because none of them would. My guess is none of us would. Because again, we see from who we are, and every single one of them did not see as God sees. Only David did. Only David did. And he says this, may the Lord reward you well for the kindness you have shown me today. And now I realize that you are surely going to be king and that the kingdom of Israel will flourish under your rule. It's as if Saul said, kings to you, David. Kings to you. Then he goes on, now, Swear to me by the Lord that when that happens, you will not kill my family and destroy my line of descendants. So he says all that, but he's like, nah, I just got to take care of my business here and make sure we're all good. So, go on. So David promised this to Saul with an oath, and then Saul went home, but David and his men went back to their stronghold. What a story. Blockbuster. 2 men, 2 kings. 2 kings. God placed one person over them and desired to put an entire kingdom underneath them, but only one man, only David, was able to see things the way that God sees them, and as a result became king of the moment and went on to be the greatest king in Israel's history. And Saul's greatest battle wasn't with David, and David's greatest battle wasn't with Saul. Saul's greatest battle was with himself, and David's greatest battle was with himself. Am I going to see this moment? Am I going to see this situation? Am I going to see this opportunity? Am I going to see the circumstance that I find myself in the way I see it, the way others see it, or am I going to see it the way that God sees it? Because I see from who I am, and am I just like everybody else, or am I in pursuit of being more and more and more like God? Because the answer to that question is going to determine how I see, and what and how I think and what I feel, and I will make decisions that will impact the rest of my lives and the lives of the people that I love with the decisions that I make. Am I going to be the king of the moment? And am I going to be a king worth following? Am I worthy of being placed in the role as king at all? That's the question that David answered that day correctly. What about you? What about you? How do you see things? Because the truth is, you don't see things as they are. You see things as you are. You don't see things as they are. You see things as you are. So the question I want to leave you with this morning as we close this morning and as we close this series, my question is simply this: how do you see things? If you were to do an evaluation of what you think and what you feel based on what you see, what would that conclusion tell you about who you are? What would it tell you about who you are? Because you see from who you are, which shapes what you think and what you feel, and it impacts the decisions that you make. So who are you? Does the world owe you? Is every opportunity about you and about you advancing and getting on further and further and farther away from the people that are behind you? Is every opportunity about you and building your kingdom and what you can get out of a situation and how you can get ahead? Is every opportunity about you? Do you constantly criticize other people? Do you criticize and critique what other people do and what their priorities are and how they spend their money and how they spend their time and what they do with themselves? Do you constantly criticize other people and feel that it makes you somehow more superior? Do you dominate conversations? Is every conversation you're in an opportunity for you to monologue about who you are and what you've done and where you've been and what you have and what you've experienced? And do you constantly one-up people? Doesn't matter what someone else talks about. You find some way to bring the conversation back to you and what you've done and where you've been and what you have and what you've experienced. Is every conversation about you and focus in on you? Are you the main character in every conversation? Is today full of hope? Is today full of promise? Your answer to those simple questions reveal who you are. And you see from who you are, which shapes what you think and shapes how you feel and impacts the decisions that you make. So what if? What if you could pause when you find yourself saying things like, I see, and I think, and I feel? What if you could just pause long enough before you finish those sentences and you asked yourself a simple question? What does what I'm about to say about me? What does what I'm about to say in this moment say about me? Because friends, in the culture we live in today, we have got to get this right. We can't be like everyone else in this world who sees things the way they see them and thinks what they think and feels what they feel. We can't be like everybody else. We have to be a people, men and women who see things the way that God sees them, that sees that he is sovereign, that he is Lord, and he has lordship in all circumstances and in all things. And it will mean that we won't see things the way that everybody else sees them. And we won't think the way that everybody else thinks. And we won't feel about those same things the way that everybody else feels, because we are people that are different, because we are people who are in pursuit of God's own heart. And as we pursue his heart, it changes the way that we are, which changes the way that we see, which changes everything else, which sets us apart from all the bloggers and all the haters and all the other soccer moms, and it makes us more like David. It makes us more like David, a man who was king of the moment and went on to be the greatest king in Israel's history. The opportunity is now right in front of you to be worthy of carrying our King's name wherever you go. And whatever you see, you will see it not as everyone else does, but as the way our King sees. And we will conduct ourselves based on what we see in a way that would bring honor and glory to our King. So, as we close, and as we close this series, I want to simply pray for you that we would be men and women after God's heart, not men and women who justify everything we think and do based on what we see.